My name's Christian Lorentzen, editor-at-large for the LRB. I'm here with veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, talking about his new book with Verso, The Killing of Osama bin Laden. So, Cy, you work in a form you call counter-narrative. How would you define that?
Let's first make it clear you were my editor for all the
Yes.
pieces that were published in the London Review that are collected in this. So you have a stake in being very nice to me.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
No, it's simply that I sometimes think I should say counter-truth because a narrative can be a fictional narrative. It's a weaker word. But there is a truth, and there's also another truth. There's a truth that the president did go in and authorize the American SEALs to kill Osama bin Laden, and they did kill him. That is a truth. Everything else after that, how they played it, how they manipulated it, how they used it, how they managed to try to sell it as this is a turning point in the war on terror, doesn't pass the smell test from the day one. So I knew that. And so it's all about critical thinking and what sometimes we're supposed to learn in school, which is, theoretically, I'm lucky I went to the University of Chicago, where in the 50s, where we had courses called Natural Sciences 1, 2, 3, and 4, Social Sciences 1, 2, 3, and 4, Humanities 1, 2, 3, and 4. You read only the original works. And so you didn't have to look at you didn't have to parrot what a professor, signing his own book to the students, and so that you have to parrot what he says. You could actually go and do a riff on what you wanted. So I think that helped me begin to think that the way to get a feel in Washington is actually read before you write. And I mean that on a mega scale. Really read the papers, read some of the position papers. I'm somebody who read when the International Atomic Energy Agency, after the shoot down of, after we destroyed Baghdad in 1991 in the first Gulf War, if you remember, we had a UN inspection team process. And the UN inspection team was called UNSRA. Not UN, whatever. And it was headed by a Swede named Ikeas. And every 3 months they put out a report. And I used to, at the minimum, skim read it pretty carefully. And sometimes, certainly, sections read. So I had years of reading about it. So when they suddenly announced WMD is there, I knew that we had bombed the hell out of everything in 91. And there was nothing in any of the reports they issued for 10 years that indicated he rebuilt any of that. He couldn't have. We were watching everything he did. So the whole story didn't make sense to me. And so, you can argue that for the Wolfowitzes, the bright ones, the bright neocons who are Straussians, the noble lie. Strauss was a great believer in the noble lie, that the leadership is entitled to tell the masses a noble lie. You can argue that they probably knew all along, and so what? It made no difference to them because the main goal was to get the WMD. But in the short run, it's a hell of a story. They're not telling the truth about something. So that's not so hard.
So in the case of the bin Laden killing, the story that you, I think, began to look critically at to begin with was the story of how they came to find him in Abbottabad.
I learned right away, very early. Well, two things happened. First, the night of the raid, like everybody else, I was happy. Maybe unlike most people, I did not think this was the end of the war on terror, because the idea of a war against an idea always struck me as nutty. And at that point, we were 10 years into it, and there was no question bin Laden. One reason we keep on talking about bin Laden is there was legislation passed in the fall of 2002. This is the issue Sanders always raises about Hillary. She signed it, which gave the president authority whenever there's Al-Qaeda to be found, without consulting Congress or anybody else, he can act. So that's why Al-Qaeda is there. What you have you have serious Sunni jihadists, Sunni Salafists, but allegiance to bin Laden? Are you kidding me? He was out of the picture. And this is sort of ad hoc. For 15 years, I don't think he did it. I think that the real story is going to be, we'll never get it maybe, but it's going to be in Hamburg. I think Muhammad Atta, had a degree in mechanical engineering. And he was the only one of the 19 guys, including bin Laden, who had enough brains to organize stuff. And so from the beginning, anyway, the point is, within a day, I could say this now. I didn't want to say it for a long time. I got a call from a journalist in Washington. The next day, I think it was maybe a day and a half later, he called up Joe Biden, the vice president, and this sort of Irish Catholic boys, network, which exists. And they were just buddies, drinking. I don't know if they were drinking. I don't know what. But and he called up to thank him, and Biden called back and said, in essence, I have notes, but I don't remember them verbatim. But his message was, yeah, thanks a lot, pal. Yeah, it's great. Re-election, all that stuff. I think you're right. It's wonderful. But let me tell you something. Anybody who thinks this guy, this president, is some community organizer from Chicago, what Obama did before going to law school and after graduating from the University of Chicago, is just some, a pussy or some, let me tell you something. He stuck at the gates. Gate didn't want to go. He didn't want to play. He drove it up his ass. That kind of talk. Guys talk. He just stuck it to him. I'm going, so this guy calls me and he says, oh, I don't know, Hersh. It's not, I can't do this, but maybe you can. He's a columnist for a paper. And he was right, wow. So a day or two later, I got a email from somebody in Pakistan who was in a ISI family. And what I also knew is that, and what maybe most people didn't know about me because they don't read. I had done a long story for the New Yorker magazine, for which I wrote until I began writing for you guys, the London Review, in 2010 and 11. I wrote a long story about the Pakistani bomb and how we were terrified about it. We make nice to the two generals who run the country. We make really nice to them. If they want a chopper, we give them a chopper.
And that's basically the governing principle in U.S.-Pakistani relations.
Totally. It's the core. They have now a second reactor. They had one called Kahuta that was enriched uranium. Now they have a plutonium reactor going. We asked them not to do it, and they said, stick it where the sun don't shine. Everybody, that's their issue. They don't care what we think about that. That's their national security. It's a matter of great pride for them. The Islamic bomb, you can call it. And that when there used to be a lot of worries about it. And so I had done that story, and I got deep into some of the stuff we were doing, and I spent a lot of time in Pakistan and deep into how they didn't trust us. And I had some stuff there that was very brutal about the real truth is, we're terrified that a couple of them, we think we know where the bombs are, and they want us to think that. But we also know the chances of, as somebody once said to me, a couple of bombs being out of the count, lying in the tall grass along the runway, very high. So I wrote this story. And, of course, the government, as it always does, denied everything. No. And then 2 days before, David Remnick, the editor of the magazine, called me to say that somebody very important high up had called him with great concern. We had told him it's the same thing we did at the the London Review. We fact check. And we send emails to the government saying what we're going to say within some reasonable form, pretty close to what, not the words, but the idea. They respond to that by saying if we ran the story as we said we would, they were going to have to shut the embassy and close consulate and move people out because they thought they would be rioting. Because many people in Pakistan, the religious people, the fundamentalists, are quite religious, support bin Laden, can't stand America, perfectly prepared to march against us, think the bomb is important, but also respect the army as sort of the father of the country, which is that's how we play it. We play through the army. Have a little cold. Anyway, so
to bring this back to
but I'll just finish it. The point being that I did know people clearly on the inside. And this isn't taken into account when people raise questions about it. And then I asked people I know in America, and amazingly enough, within the 2 days, I had a meeting, and I get the same story, the same, almost verbatim, the same account. It's so close on so many issues. What I was heard from the ISI, so I have a story, and from there you go.
To lay out the principles of those stories, a lot of it has to do with the question of, would the U.S. violate Pakistani sovereignty without alerting the Pakistani authorities, right? And also the source of U.S. knowledge of bin Laden's location. To just go through the story as you've written it, as it is in the book.
Well, they're a great ally.
Yeah.
we just had an example. I'm always digressing. We just had an example where the president has announced he's going to send 250 special forces troops into Syria.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no problem there. We can violate that. The only countries that are invited there, the government, Syria is controlled by a government headed by Bashar Assad. We don't like that, but that's the reality. And Russia's there because they were asked to be. Hezbollah's there. The Iranians are there because they were asked to be. We're not asked to be. But we go in there. Will we go into Israel without being asked? Or Canada? No. Or Pakistan? No. Those are all no-nos. We would not do anything. There's tension because we operate. There's something called the Hindu Kush. The border between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan is the mountain range, Hindu Kush, and there's a tenuous. It's no man's land, and we can operate maybe 6 or 8 kilometers across into their country without request. But after that, we have to ask, and they're very sensitive about it. Believe me, I know that from going there. They don't like the fact that we sometimes cheat a couple miles. The whole notion that we would do that is so counter to anybody who understands the game about the bomb, that we would undercut the Pakistani leadership like that and leave them as we left it. The way we left it was they had 2 options. They could say, oh my, yes, we didn't track the planes and our radar system, which, by the way, again, if reporters would just do the work, Pakistan helped us in the war against the Russians in Afghanistan. The ISI came in. When the Russians took over in Pakistan, in Afghanistan,
This is in the 80s.
Yes, in the 80s.
So
the Indians came
79
in. Indians set up an embassy and 8 consulates. So ISI comes in on our side. Again, the 70s and 80s for the Russians and the Indians. In the 80s, the ISI, this very powerful intelligence service, comes in. And what they do, of course, is they go to some of the Indian consulates, destroy them, and hang. There's wire service stories about this. Hang some of the diplomats to trees. Horrible stuff. A lot of concern about that. India's mad. What does India have in 1982 that Pakistan doesn't have? It has the bomb then. Pakistan's worried about it. They may have had a reactor, but they didn't weaponize probably until the early 90s. Making a weapon is really hard. The difference between having a capability and actually fabricating a weapon, believe me, it's years of work. You have to build a huge complex. You're dealing with very hot stuff that can kill anybody who gets, if there's a leak. And so if you go back and look at radar systems, we built them a radar system, spent over $900 million on it. I learned after doing the article that the phrase for the radar system is 3D audible. It's so good you can't erase any image. So anyway, the idea that we could fly choppers stealth choppers which don't exist, and not be seen by their radar is comical, but that's the story they told. So we left the Pakistani high command with an option of saying, oh my God, well, we didn't see him. We screwed up. Or the other option is to say, well, we knew he was there and we helped the Americans kill him, which would lead them. Their kids couldn't go to school the next day. They would be their house would be surrounded by people saying, you killers of our Christ. He was a big leader. Bin Laden, to many of the people, would have been incredibly chaotic for them to do it. So they took, but I can tell you right now, I know it's still a source of great aggravation among them. We've tried hard to make it. They don't trust us because of that. And that's what Gates was fighting about that night. He won't say so publicly, and I'm just saying this sort of heuristically. In his book, he writes a long paragraph about his rage at what happened that night. And what he says, it's because they made the SEALs public. Oh, come on. SEALs do these raids. They go on kill missions all the time. He was mad.
We've just lost a SEAL who was working with the Peshmerga in Kurdish-controlled Syria, right?
Yeah. Well, yes,
that was reported today or yesterday, right?
Yes. Look, it's a digression, but the number of troops we have inside Iraq, we announced claim 3,000, is over 20,000. We just can do it. Well, we control everything. If you add the carrier, the troops on it, you're in the 25,000. Because they're flying missions off the carrier. I could spend my life trying to fight lies. But then I'm not only fighting lies of the government, I'm fighting the newspapers that carry the lies. That once they carry the lies, it's very hard for a major newspaper to back off and say we were misled, or we weren't informed. It's just like the investigation of the of the bombing of in Afghanistan of the Doctors Without Borders hospital. The Army just came out and they gave the boys reprimands. Well, I wrote a story for the New Yorker in 1970 about the reprimand issue. A group of guys coming back from a bad mission were angry.
In Vietnam.
Yeah, in Vietnam. They were guys in Apache pilots. They'd had a big fight. They lost some people. They were mad. They were coming back. I can understand that. And they were flying over what they considered to be a free fire zone, and they saw a complex of hutches with two fences around it. And they thought, we got a hot VC area. They peeled off 4 or 5 of the choppers, and they blew the hell out of it. It was a special secure quarter facilities for the wives and children of South Vietnamese generals. So we had to investigate it. And so, my God, how do we get around it? Well, we're not going to call it murder, as they did in this case. We're going to call it a violation of rules. That's the first thing they did. This was a violation of rules. That what happened with the Doctors Without Borders. It's the whole way they treated it. Nothing more than that. No mens rea. It's just, oh my God, they didn't follow the rules. And so there'll be a letter of reprimand. Well, in the story I wrote in 1970, the letter of reprimand included this coda. If there's no further adverse reporting on your actions while in this tour, this letter will be removed from your file when you leave the country. I actually wrote Eugene Fidel, the lawyer who's been involved in lawyering for the Doctors Without Borders in some way. I wrote him an email and told him to ask for the reprimand, get an unredacted copy. I can't imagine they've changed the game. They're doing everything to minimize it. And so this is again, here I am thinking differently than everybody else about it. But I'm not thinking differently in that, oh my God, it's an outrage. I'm thinking more very specifically. For me, the issue of the Doctors Without Borders is the premise that this is a violation of rules. Because when you treat crimes that way, you minimize them. And that, to me, is the outrage. So I have my outrage, but it's more complicated than I think the newspaper outrage or even the Doctors Without Borders. It's not that it's the process.
The system is set up to allow these
exactly.
things to go on happening.
That's what the issue is. You can fight all you want about what should happen that day. It was horrible and horrible. And, they went back and fired. I mean, I don't know enough. All I know is that there was a certain amount of mens rea involved. It's just at a certain point, they were just killing. And it doesn't matter if they were wrong about the target, the intent was to kill. And I'm not a lawyer. I can't even argue that. But that's the way I look at it. So in this case, I learned right away that the whole story about couriers, and anybody who's seen Zero Dark 30 knows, the reason they pushed hard for the courier story on the inside, which Gates objected to, this I do know, bitterly, was a lot of people in the CIA were very worried about what they'd done in torture. And if you remember the movie, in the movie, they tortured somebody to get the name of the courier that led him to bin Laden. It's all a lie. But the whole structure for that had a significant reason. It was to publicly tell the American people, it's really okay to waterboard sometimes. Look what we got. What happened is there was a walk-in. And the people, and how the agency works is so interesting. There's something in the agency that you can call it, the newspapers sometimes in a story called it eyewash. It's when you do something and you have to protect the source, you let other people in the agency think that they were responsible for certain actions. So you've got people down in the bowels, intelligence people in the intelligence office and analytical office of the CIA, looking at couriers, trying to figure out, and they've been doing it for years without much luck. But you now tell them, you did it, guys. And then they can be taken out to reporters and be very credible because they are credible. They think they did it.
The cover story extends to the government agency itself.
Well, of course. Yeah. I asked a friend of mine, there was a piece in the Washington Post about 6 months ago about this eyewash thing, and the agency acknowledged to the Senate Intelligence Committee there are times when they lie to the staff, and it's called eyewash. And I asked one of my friends who knows a great deal about this, who served at a very high level there for many years and constantly is inside the community. I said, do you know about eyewash? He said, oh, yes, he said. There's another word for it we use actually in the agency. And I said, what's that? He said, lying. Of course you lie to people. And it's, again, a noble lie. You're lying because the little people in the intelligence division who are looking at trying to figure out names, the Arabic names, and trying to find out what a courier, who's a courier, who's not a courier. They have a victory. You give them a victory, then they're credible. And in the piece that that we worked on for so long together, you and I, the Bin Laden story, there was a section about the Senate Intelligence Committee put out a 6,000-page report on terror. 5,500 pages were redacted.
Oh, on torture, you mean?
On torture, I beg your pardon. On torture. See, you are my editor. And so, and in the report, a long section on couriers was left because I think they didn't realize, I don't know why they didn't connect it. And the report that the Senate said, nobody could make heads or sense of the couriers. Yeah. You couldn't track the names. And anyway, the notion that bin Laden was operating, I mean, there was no internet there. They told us in the very beginning. And so what they do with a story like this, because I will tell you that the notion that the Pakistanis didn't know is getting pretty dominant. I was just in London talking about this book for a week, and I was in a big debate a conversation with a very high-ranking, the number 2 editor of the London Guardian. And this is, Royal Colony, and many journalists in London, in the UK, have gone many more times than Americans to India and Pakistan. There's a lot more familiarity with it. Europe is Europe, and they're closer. I asked them in the middle we were doing a colloquy before a crowd of people, and I said, his name was Paul Johnson, a very decent guy, and I said, Paul, just for the hell of it, what did you guys think? You've got a lot of foreign correspondents. The Guardian's good liberal, wonderful newspaper. He said, well, we talked about it quite a bit and concluded that, of course, the Pakistanis had to know. I mean, the next question I could have asked was, why did you then proceed from there to do a story? But that's a big jump. That's a commitment of people and resources that they may not have, because this is a diminishing time of money.
How has the business and the relationship between the press corps and the U.S. federal government, the Pentagon, the military changed over the course of your career?
Oh, it's much more intimate. It's much more involved. I think one of the things they did, if you remember, in 1991, when Bush won, the first president attacked Baghdad. Yeah. They embedded journalists, and they embedded it with army units. And here's the thing. Our kids, like all kids, are nice and funny, our soldiers. They're nice kids. And I've talked to journalists who were embedded, let's say, with the Marine unit. And on the third day of the war, they were driving somewhere, and they were driving from Kuwait to Baghdad. There wasn't much contact, but they were worried. There was a sniper here and there. There wasn't very much. There was really no war there. Obviously, the Ba'ath Party believers and the stalwarts there all retreated to fight another day, to fight the war of attrition that did begin. And I know guys who told me that they saw our guys would get jittery. They'd heard about somebody got hurt with a sniper, and they'd be driving along, and there'd be a car on the highway next to them, and at an intersection. And the tanks would be at the intersection. They'd try and wave the car that's rolling along parallel to them to stop. They didn't want them to get parallel with them. And they'd scream in English, stop, stop. And everybody's, well, who are these guys? And they opened up. And he said it was second or third day. They opened up and killed a bunch of babies and kids. And everybody was upset. He didn't file it. He didn't file it.
Because he was embedded.
He's embedded. They're nice kids.
Yeah.
They're all going to get charged with murder or whatever it is, or dereliction of duty, or failing to observe the rules and regulations, whatever it is, and get a letter in their file. But, and so that was the willingness of the press, particularly the anchors. All the anchors went, and they all wrote, they all covered it. Being an anchor is like being a movie star. You have to be, you have to
Who was the Scud Stud back then?
Oh, God.
Do you remember that?
Oh, God.
It became a kind of celebrity move.
Right, absolutely.
A careerist celebrity.
Right. Well, remember
status
Brian Williams in the 2003 war, the anchorman for NBC, just lied about what he did.
Right, and that's taken him down and out. He sent him from the NBC Nightly News to MSNBC. To turn it around in another way, You've said that when it comes to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and also in Eastern Europe, the Obama administration and much of the, for lack of a better term, establishment or parts of them are still caught up in a Cold War mentality. Some of your reporting on Syria has asserted this. Why do you think that is, and how pervasive is it, and is there any hope that we'll perhaps age out of it?
I would have thought we would. The smart guys I know on the inside, again, for me, the distinction is there are people on the inside, when they take the oath of office, as everybody does, really believe it, that they're taking the oath of loyalty to the Constitution and not to the president. What you have is all time and time again, it quickly morphs into our duty is to the president. So the first move people now believe after 9/11, the first stop should have been to Moscow, because they had 2 wars with the Chechens, and many of them, they still proliferate. For example, al-Baghdadi, who runs ISIS, he surrounded his operational core. They include Sunnis who were in the Ba'ath Party from Iraq, but they include a lot of people who fought in Chechnya. The second war Russia had was 10 years. Remember how brutal it was on both sides? Horrible. But they all thought, this is a guy that probably had a lot to tell us. He is sharing intelligence with us on ISIS. If we do any targeting at all, it's largely because of the people he has inside. I hope I'm okay saying that. And so the military guys see it a little differently. They're less worried about the Cold War, aspect, but politically it's suicide. In America, you mentioned the word, you could attack, any day you attack Putin, why, you get 2 points in popularity. Same with Bashar Assad. I'm always amazed. Bashar Assad he's in a war of life and death. If he loses the war to ISIS or al-Nusra, he and his wife, his pretty wife, and his 2 pretty children will be swinging in a yard like Mussolini with their throats cut. He knows that. That's the end game for him. And so he does what people do when they're in a desperate war. I'm always amazed that he's criticized so much for using barrel bombs, which are what you ship oil in, 63-gallon, because I know a country that was in a war that wasn't life and death in terms of immediate peril to the leadership in America, that used barrel bombs for 7 years full of napalm and cacodylate acid. It was called the United States of America in the war against South Vietnam. For 7 years we do barrel bombs. Why? They're cheaper. And not only that, so I always wondered, and they have much less. They have 63 kilograms, 120 some of explosive, as opposed to a 500-pound bomb full of 500 or 500. It's a bigger bomb. The bomb much more bang. I always wondered, it would have been better when I hear about another barrel bomb attack if he used 500-pounders, which would kill many more people. I just see that as so. I just am amused, not amused, disturbed. And we are also a country that dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. A couple 100,000 people just to demonstrate that we had one. We could do it. No military purpose at all. Everybody knew. I'd make the same. Gar Opowitz has written about this for years, the American scholar, about Cold War being a factor in that. It's it's certainly a very relevant argument. A lot of people don't accept that either. But I always wonder why we are so quick when we don't like somebody. We're really very rough. And just as I said, the President of the United States can get brownie points from putting 250 special ops guys across the border into Syria without permission. And you know what it's about? My heuristic thought. The battle for Palmyra turned out to be, though nobody, again, reading and not writing, there was a lot of stuff written in the international press about this battle. It was door to door in Palmyra. ISIS just stood there and fought. They had no choice. They were going to go nowhere. Syrians did a great job, and I guess you could say, because they went and they killed a lot of people. They also suffered a lot of losses. The Russians had to put in a Spetsnaz. There's their equivalent of our Joint Special Operations Command. And there were foothills or mountains above Palmyra where they got into wild fighting with ISIS. And a lot of the Russian commandos got killed. It was a bloodbath on all sides and a very decisive victory. And so their Russian commandos were sort of a new element turning the battle. So the president puts in 250 It sort of is to say, I can, mine is as big as yours. I'm going to put him in. And the immediate thought the smart people I know had is he's not going to put him in because the only way he can resupply them is by air. And Russia controls the air. Russia has these huge radars they've installed, wonderful radars, S-400s, I think, that they can just reach all over. And so Russia, theoretically, an American airplane coming to resupply somebody because we're not welcome there. The Syrians aren't happy about us being there, could shoot it down. And so my friends, a lot of my friends said to me, there must be a back-channel deal with Russia. There isn't. Obama just knows he's going to send his planes in, the Russians will not shoot it down. It's sort of gamesmanship. Mm-hmm. But it's gamesmanship that you wonder to what end. He spent 28 minutes at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night, telling sometimes lame jokes, his farewell. Mm-hmm. And then he showed a video he had done that was also lame. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, he really protects his relationship with the press. He's never missed the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He's never deigned not to go. He really values it. This is him saying, I'm with you guys, despite the fact they may put a lot of you in jail and put pressure on. He's laying down a marker, obeisance. He's saying, you're the king. I'm coming here and playing for you.
Well, he has, in one sense, a very cozy relationship with many sectors of the press, certainly the opinion pages. He's constantly having
little soirees,
centrist columnists over to dinner at the White House, David Brooks and such.
But there was a long.
But on the other hand, he has one of the worst records for prosecuting journalists.
You wouldn't know it among the awe and the genuflecting they did. I'm one of them. Am I crazy? I would do anything not to go to one of those dinners. The only time I ever went is I won a prize. And poor Richard Nixon had to give me a prize. I mean, it was like freezing.
How did that go?
Not very well. It's not very well because he was like, it was,
Did you shake hands?
I don't remember. I'm sure I would have. You would not do that. That would be, you can do it. I could do it. I could do it in writing. I don't have to do it in a punk way. But no, I would never disrespect the president in public. I mean, he's a president. But I sure disrespect him in terms of policy and other things. And I think Obama, here's the tragedy for me. My guess is he's probably going to be I have a son who's very smart too, very smart, much more than anybody else in the family. He's always saying, you don't understand. He's going to be the brightest president we've had. We're going to have him 50 years. He is very bright. He's edgy, much more edgy than people think. He's somebody you don't go to with bad news. Example. His great piece of jurisdiction was Obamacare, and everybody in his staff knew the computers wouldn't work, and nobody told him. He's an interesting guy. He's very, as I say, I'd go have dinner with the guy any day in the week. I'm sure he's very smart. He's very well read, but he's fallen into a trap of using force. It's just
he hasn't used as much force as he could have.
No,
though. He didn't. He went into Libya, or he bombed Libya, but didn't go into Syria.
No, he stayed out of Syria. That's why the 250 makes no sense. Except this is so Putin. We can do it. You're not going to shoot them. We know you're not going to shoot them. What does Putin want? Putin, the same thing the Iranians want. They want to be respected. What's it about? Hillary Clinton keeps on talking about, in terms of the Iranian nuclear deal, that it happened because she put sanctions on it. The only way that deal went down was the day after 10 years of Bush, Cheney, and Obama, we finally said about a year ago to the Iranians, you can keep on enriching. We finally said, what the position had been from George Bush on, we want to talk about stopping enrichment and stopping not going. And the way we're going to do it is first you have to stop enrichment, then we'll talk about it. You can't, it's never was a bargain. Once we said, let's find a way for you to enrich, they're enriching right now for commercial use 3.7%, way short of 95 they need for a bomb, under IAEA cameras. So my own take on it, the Iranians got away with the deal of the century. They gave up something they didn't have for an end to sanctions. And now what do? There's $150 billion on the table, and then we start screwing around with the sanctions. We say, well, they're not going to get it yet. We've given them $3 billion so far, and so they may end up walking away from the deal, which is going to be horrible because we can't stop playing politics with this stuff. And Kerry's was the one who was bragging about they only have $3 billion out of it. I don't understand our policy. We can really do so much more if we, we're such a great country, we really are. My parents are immigrants, Eastern European, uneducated. Only way I learned anything is when I was 12 or 13. I ran across the Book of the Month Club, 99 cents. They'd give me one nonfiction book a month. And I used to get $1. I delivered papers. I'd pay $1.99 a month. And I'd get these tomes. Sometimes they were anti-communist crap, but a lot of times they were histories of the Habsburg, histories of sometimes even the Russian Revolution. I read a lot of stuff, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And so I got a scholarship to college. University of Chicago. I didn't pay tuition. I think I paid a minimal fee, but we're talking about $100 a quarter or something like that. I was not editor of the Harvard Review. Harvard, what's it called?
Harvard Law Review?
Oh, no, Harvard, the Crimson, the Daily Crimson, or the
yeah.
Yale Daily News.
Sure.
I graduated. I wasn't even editor. I didn't work on my college newspaper.
You didn't work on the college
newspaper?
newspaper?
No, I had no. Right. I never thought.
So
I'd be
you went
a
to law school, and
went
then
to law school.
How'd you end up as a reporter then?
I flunked out of law school,
Mm-hmm.
and why do you ask me this question?
It seemed like that's where you were heading.
No, I was going to say this, that 11 years after graduating from college, I write My Lai.
Yeah.
I'm writing about a massacre. I'm sticking two fingers in the eye of a Republican president who ran on a platform that he had a secret plan to end the war, which turned out to be to win it. We didn't know that. I'm sticking two eyes in his eye. And I know that in 100 countries, nations of the world, I'd be in real trouble doing it. Instead, I'm fame, fortune, glory. I got more money than I'd ever seen. Ended up with about $6,000, $7,000 in cash, which I had no money. I was married with two little kids. We make between the two of us. I was working for the AP for 118. My wife was a social worker. We had two little kids. We rented a house. All of a sudden, I got prizes. I got a bunch of prizes, not just Pulitzer. I got 4 or 5 other big prizes. And invited to give speeches. The Pulitzer Prize too, which was $1,000 then. And so you're going to think I'm going to complain about this country? No. It's a spectacular place.
In Turkey, things would be...
In Turkey, are you kidding?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have gotten... But you know what happened to me in law school? I flunked out, and I hung around. I was just doing what 22 or 23-year-old kids. I was trying to figure out which part of my body moved where. I was so lost in space. Mm-hmm. Drinking and playing around. And I'm telling the story. I had a wonderful girlfriend, and at a party at the University of Chicago, I drank too much, and some guy, we call it bird dogging. I talked about this earlier today. Bird dogging was the phrase hitting on a guy's girlfriend when he was sort of, he was gone.
I've seen it happen, yeah.
Well, I don't. Did you call it bird dogging? We called it back then. Now, people don't know that word now. Anyway, it was okay. And about a month later, we ran into this guy. His name was Peter Lacey. He ended up working for Time magazine. And Peter, we all were friendly, talking about it, laughing about it. I think I was laughing a little bit. I didn't like it, but anyway, he working at a newspaper agency called City News Bureau, which had been set up by the Chicago newspapers and the radio stations and the wire services. Said there's so much crime in this goddamn city. Let's pool our money, set up an agency. It was made famous by a play by Ben Hecht called Front Page. Mm-hmm. We cover the crime. All we do is cover crime in the courts, and and fires. That was the group. And Lacey said they hired 2 people, graduates from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern. They come in, they get half the jobs, and the other half are just people who walk off the street. And the only requirement for going in there is you can walk straight. You had a BA. So I went and I applied. Months later, I was randomly, I pick up a phone somewhere, and there's this guy, editor Ryberg, calling me months later, saying, "Hersh?" I said, "Yeah." I had moved out of the apartment, but I was there visiting a friend. I slept there overnight. I think we played cards and drank, what kids do.
Sure.
And so in the morning when I woke up, the phone's ringing. I pick it up. And he says, Ryberg, "Come down today. Your name is up." So I go there and I get a job, $35 a week. I later watched as I went to look for a replacement. They would start from the pile, and if you didn't answer, he put your name at the bottom of the pile. That's how I got into journalism. I always wanted to be. Are you kidding me? But it was a fit. I liked it.
Flash forward 50 years. We have an election going on. What do you think of the prospects for any of these candidates? I guess we're down, it seems, to Clinton and Trump, and how they'll compare to this administration, the Obama administration.
Well, the real answer, how in the hell do I know? It doesn't matter what I think. I have my own secret wish for the world. When you mentioned MSNBC and CNN and all these shows in which they put people on, journalists come in, and journalists and politicians come in, and they have these panels. My secret wish is we'd get rid of this word, this phrase, I think. If you got rid of the word I think, nobody could say anything. So it doesn't really matter what I think. The one thing I know, I worked in the McCarthy campaign because I came back from Vietnam. I covered the Vietnam War. I was mostly in the Pentagon, but I was over there. And I came back convinced after 2 years. I got in trouble with the AP because I was edgy about the war. And so they wanted to reassign me to another beat, and so I left. And I knew the war was mass murder. I just knew it. I talked to officers and guys who did it. I'm covering. It's all about the war, and guys are honest about it. They couldn't stand what they were doing, but they were doing it. You had to get body counts to get promoted. You had to have more. If there's 10 lieutenant colonels looking for one colonel's job, the guy that has the most kills has a better shot. So they were killing willy-nilly, and so I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't think the newspaper business would be good enough. So a neighbor, Mary McGrory, who was a columnist, told me that Eugene McCarthy was going to run. And I joined him. He was a Benedictine, very interesting. He went to Mass every day, and I wasn't allowed to say. He really believed in church state. He was very bright. He was a lover of poetry. I can't tell how many times I went out and books of poetry. George Sepharis, the Greek poet, was one of his favorites. He could quote almost anything. And we had people like Robert Lowell in the campaign working in my office, delivering stuff for me, buying me coffee. Robert Lowell, I'm not kidding you, for 3 months. Cal, he was great, by the way. This before he had breakdowns, but he was.
So he had some before this.
Yeah, but he would sit in the stands with me and the kids in the campaign, and the last thing he wanted was these bright, beautiful girls coming up from Radcliffe wanting to talk poetry. He just wanted to talk about things. He was very nice, and
he'd gone to jail as a conscientious.
Yeah, that's right.
Objector.
You got him. He cared a lot. Anyway, the point of all this is that McCarthy one day at the University of Wisconsin, you could get 5,000 people there to rally about anything. It's just the most active campus. And he was asked a question about the war very early, and he said something that I knew then we were going to be okay. I really did. He said, well, here's the problem with this war, Vietnam. It's immoral. And we don't ever talk about morality. We walk out of Iraq after 11 years of destroying the country, and we think the fact that we got out is fine. We don't have an obligation to those people there. We wonder why. And the press doesn't even make a connection. Joe Biden visits one day, and Muqtada Sadr has his people go and run into the green zone the next day. They don't make a connection between Joe Biden maybe being there that day. You can move. Believe me, Muqtada Sadr, the leader of that Shia group, he can move the Badr group. He can move people in social media. You could do it in 3 hours. You can get them going. I mean, I would make that connection, but wasn't made at all. America is pretty much hated around the world right now, and we don't see it. We just don't get it.
Don't know if that's the best note to end on, but
well, I can rephrase it.
No,
America's really loved by everybody. I think it's true that we are really disliked much more than we want to believe, and that's sad because we're a much better country than people think we are. We are. We just do much too much violence.